My name is Ryan, and today I'm going to tell you about the moment I realized my greatest strength had become my greatest weakness. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. If this story resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in the pattern of thinking too much, analyzing too much, never feeling ready to act, please subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who might be stuck in the same cycle, and leave a comment telling me about your own struggle with overthinking. Because sometimes just knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. I was 36 years old, working as a data analyst for a tech company in Seattle, and I was completely paralyzed. From the outside, my life probably looked fine. Good job, decent apartment, no major crises. But inside, I was stuck, frozen, unable to make any significant decision because I could never stop analyzing long enough to actually act. I'd been offered a promotion 6 months ago, team lead position, significant raise, more responsibility. Most people would have jumped at it, but I couldn't decide. I made spreadsheets comparing the pros and cons. I researched leadership styles. I talked to people in similar roles. I analyzed my personality type, my stress tolerance, my career trajectory. I read books about decision-making. I created decision matrices. And 6 months later, I still hadn't given an answer. My boss was getting frustrated. The opportunity was going to disappear. But I couldn't commit because I didn't feel like I had enough information. What if I was missing something crucial? What if there was an angle I hadn't considered? The same pattern played out in every area of my life. I'd been dating Sarah for 3 years, and she'd been hinting, then asking directly about our future. Marriage, kids, a life together. But I couldn't decide. What if we weren't compatible long-term? What if I was settling? What if there was someone better suited for me? I needed more time to analyze our relationship, to be certain. She was tired of waiting. I could see it in her eyes. I wanted to move out of my apartment. It was too expensive, too small, but I couldn't choose a new place. Every apartment I looked at had flaws. What if I chose wrong? What if there was a better option I hadn't seen yet? I needed to look at more places, research more neighborhoods, analyze more data. I wanted to start exercising, but I couldn't decide on the right program. Should I join a gym? Which one? What kind of workout routine? Should I hire a trainer, do CrossFit, start running? I researched fitness approaches for weeks, never actually starting anything. Every decision, big or small, became an exhausting mental exercise. And the more I analyzed, the more uncertain I became, because for every reason to do something, I could find 5 reasons not to. For every pro, I could identify 10 potential cons. My analytical mind, the thing that made me good at my job, had become a prison. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Sarah and I were having dinner at my apartment, and she brought it up again. "Ryan, we need to talk about our future. I love you, but I can't keep waiting for you to decide if you want to build a life with me. It's been 3 years. I know, I just need to be sure. This is a huge decision. I want to make the right choice. But how will you ever be sure? What magical piece of information are you waiting for that's going to make everything clear? I don't know. I need more time to think about it." She looked at me with a mix of sadness and frustration. "You always need more time to think. About everything. Us, your job, where to live, what to eat for dinner. You think and think and think, but you never actually do anything. You're so afraid of making the wrong choice that you're not making any choice. And that's a choice too, Ryan. Choosing nothing is still choosing." Her words hit me like a physical blow. She was right. I'd been so paralyzed by fear of making the wrong decision that I was letting life pass me by. Opportunities disappearing, relationships straining, time slipping away. "I don't know how to stop," I admitted. "My brain won't turn off. Every decision feels huge. What if I'm wrong? What if I miss something important? What if you're never going to have perfect certainty? What if you just have to choose and trust it'll work out?" After she left, I sat alone in my apartment, feeling the weight of my indecision crushing me. She was right about everything. I was stuck, paralyzed, trapped in my own head. I'd always prided myself on being thoughtful, analytical, careful, but somewhere along the way, careful had become crippling, thoughtful had become obsessive, analytical had become paralyzing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, my mind spinning through all the decisions I needed to make. The job, Sarah, the apartment, everything, and I realized this was the pattern. I'd lie awake analyzing, trying to think my way to certainty, never reaching it, exhausting myself in the process. Around 2 a.m., desperate and exhausted, I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid. I prayed. God, I don't even know if you're listening. I don't know if you care about something like this. But I can't keep living like this. I can't stop thinking. I can't stop analyzing. I can't make a decision because I'm terrified of being wrong. I'm paralyzed and I don't know how to move forward. If you're real, if you have any guidance, I need it because I'm drowning in my own thoughts. I lay in the darkness, not expecting anything, but a thought came to me. Not a voice, not something dramatic, just a clear thought that felt different from my usual mental noise. You think too much, but I already have the answer. I sat up, startled. That wasn't something I would think. My entire life was built on the premise that I needed to think more, analyze more, gather more information. But this thought was challenging that entirely. You think too much, but I already have the answer. I grabbed my phone and typed it in my notes app. You think too much, but I already have the answer. I stared at the words. They felt both liberating and terrifying. What if I didn't need to figure everything out? What if the answers already existed and my overthinking was actually preventing me from seeing them? But how would I know what the answers were? How would I access them? I couldn't just stop thinking. My brain didn't work that way. The next morning, exhausted and raw, I did something unusual. I went to a church. Not the big, anonymous mega-church I'd attended twice for Christmas services, a smaller community church near my apartment that I'd walked past hundreds of times. I slipped in during the Sunday service, sat in the back, arms crossed. The music felt too emotional, the whole atmosphere felt foreign, but I stayed. The pastor, a man in his 50s named James, preached about Proverbs 3. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Some of you are exhausting yourselves trying to figure everything out, he said, and I felt like he was speaking directly to me. You're analyzing every angle, researching every option, trying to think your way to perfect certainty. But God doesn't call you to have perfect understanding. He calls you to trust Him, to act on what you know, even when you don't have all the answers. His words pierced something in me. I'd been trying to have perfect understanding before acting, trying to eliminate all uncertainty through analysis. But what if that was impossible? What if faith meant acting without complete certainty? After the service, I found myself approaching Pastor James. My hands were shaking. Can I talk to you about overthinking? He smiled kindly. Of course. Let's sit. In his office, I told him about my paralysis, the job offer I couldn't accept, the relationship I couldn't commit to, the apartment I couldn't choose, the endless analysis that never led to action. Last night, I prayed, and I heard, or thought I heard, something. You think too much, but I already have the answer. Does that make sense? Pastor James nodded slowly. It makes perfect sense. You've been trying to be God, trying to know everything, predict everything, control everything through analysis. But that's not your job. Your job is to trust, to act on what you know, even when you don't know everything. But how do I know which choice is right? What if I choose wrong? What if there's not always one right choice? What if God can work through multiple options? What if He's more interested in you trusting Him than in you choosing perfectly? His words challenged everything I believed about decision-making. I'd always thought the goal was to analyze, until I found the one correct answer. But what if that wasn't how life worked? We have a group, Pastor James said. Meets Wednesday evenings. People struggling with anxiety, overthinking, the need to control through analysis. Would you consider coming? I started to analyze whether I should go. What would it cost me time-wise? What would I have to share? What if it wasn't helpful? And then I caught myself. This was the pattern, overthinking instead of just trying. Yes, I'll come. That week I couldn't stop thinking about those words. You think too much, but I already have the answer. They challenged my entire approach to life, my identity as someone careful, thorough, analytical. What if my overthinking wasn't wisdom? What if it was fear disguised as prudence? What if I was using analysis as a way to avoid the risk of actually living? Wednesday evening came. I almost didn't go, spent 30 minutes analyzing whether it was worth it, but I forced myself to get in my car and drive to the church. The group was small, maybe 8 people sitting in a circle. Pastor James welcomed me and asked everyone to introduce themselves. As people shared about anxiety, about overthinking, about paralysis by analysis, I recognized myself in their stories. These were people whose minds wouldn't stop, who exhausted themselves trying to think their way to certainty, who were stuck in the same loop I was. When it was my turn, I said, "I'm Ryan, and I can't make decisions because I can never stop thinking long enough to act. I'm losing opportunities, straining relationships, wasting my life because I'm paralyzed by overthinking, and I don't know how to stop." A woman named Lisa, probably in her 40s, spoke up. "I know exactly what you mean. I've been there, still am there sometimes. But I'm learning something. Overthinking isn't the same as wisdom. Sometimes you have to act on good enough information instead of waiting for perfect information. But what if I'm wrong? Then you'll handle it. You'll adjust. You'll learn. But staying stuck forever isn't better than potentially being wrong." Her words resonated. Was I so afraid of being wrong that I'd chosen paralysis instead? Was that really better? After the meeting, a man named Derek approached me. "First time is hardest, but you showed up. That's something." "I almost didn't. I spent 30 minutes overthinking whether to come." He laughed. "Of course you did. That's the pattern. But you came anyway. That's progress." Driving home, I thought about what Pastor James had said. "You've been trying to be God." That was exactly it. I'd been trying to eliminate all uncertainty, know all outcomes, control everything through sheer mental effort. But I wasn't God. I couldn't know everything, and maybe I wasn't supposed to. I pulled out my phone and looked at those words again. You think too much, but I already have the answer. Could it be true? Could I stop exhausting myself trying to figure everything out and trust that the answers already existed? That maybe I didn't need perfect certainty before acting? I didn't know, but for the first time in years I wanted to find out. If you've read this far, let me ask you, are you stuck in overthinking? Do you exhaust yourself analyzing every decision, never feeling ready to act? Do you let opportunities pass by because you can't achieve perfect certainty? Leave a comment and tell me, because I'm learning that we're not meant to have all the answers. We're not meant to eliminate all uncertainty through analysis. We're meant to act on what we know and trust God with the rest. And that might be the hardest and most freeing thing I've ever learned. The first Wednesday group meeting changed something in me. Not dramatically, but there was a crack in the wall of analysis I'd built. A tiny opening that suggested maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to have everything figured out before acting. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about what Pastor James had said. God's more interested in you trusting Him than in you choosing perfectly. That challenged my entire operating system. I'd spent my whole adult life believing that the goal was to make the objectively correct choice through thorough analysis. But what if there wasn't always one objectively correct choice? What if multiple options could work, and the key was trusting God to work through whichever one I chose? At work on Thursday, my boss Helen stopped by my desk. "Ryan, I need an answer about the team lead position. It's been 6 months. I can't hold it open indefinitely." My immediate instinct was to ask for more time, to explain that I needed to analyze a few more factors. But I caught myself. That's what I'd been doing for 6 months, and it hadn't gotten me anywhere. "Can I give you an answer by Monday?" I heard myself say. She looked surprised. "Monday works. But Ryan, I need a real answer. Yes or no, not more analysis." After she walked away, my heart was pounding. I'd just committed to making a decision in 4 days. No more endless analysis, no more spreadsheets, just a decision. That evening I called Sarah. "Can we talk? In person?" We met at a coffee shop and she looked guarded, tired. "What did you want to talk about?" "I went to a church on Sunday and to a group on Wednesday for people who overthink, who can't make decisions because they can never feel certain enough." "You're getting help for this?" "I'm trying to. Because you were right. I've been so paralyzed by fear of choosing wrong that I'm not choosing at all. And I'm losing you, losing opportunities, losing my life to analysis." She was quiet for a moment. "What changed?" I prayed. For the first time in years, I actually prayed. And I heard something, or felt something. "You think too much, but I already have the answer. Like maybe I'm not supposed to figure everything out on my own. Maybe I'm supposed to trust that the answers exist even when I can't see them perfectly. So what does that mean for us?" "I don't know yet, but I'm working on it. I have to give my boss an answer about the promotion by Monday. And after I do that, after I prove to myself I can make a decision without perfect certainty, I want to talk to you about us. Really talk, not analyze endlessly. Actually decide." She looked at me with cautious hope. "I want to believe you, Ryan. But I've heard you say you'll make a decision before." "I know, but this time feels different because I'm not trying to think my way to certainty. I'm trying to learn to trust even without certainty." That weekend, I forced myself to stop analyzing the promotion. No more research, no more pros and cons lists. Instead, I went to the Sunday service at Pastor James's church. The sermon was on Matthew 6, Jesus talking about worry, about how we can't add a single hour to our lives by worrying. "Consider the birds of the air," Pastor James read. "They don't store up food in barns, but your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they?" Notice Jesus isn't saying don't plan at all, Pastor James said. He's saying don't be consumed by anxiety about the future. Don't try to control every outcome through excessive planning and analysis. There's a difference between wise planning and anxious overthinking. After the service, I approached him. "How do I tell the difference between wise planning and anxious overthinking?" "That's a good question. Here's what I've learned. Wise planning has an endpoint. You gather information, you consider options, you make a decision. Anxious overthinking is endless. It's a loop. You keep analyzing because you're afraid to commit. The analysis itself becomes a way to avoid the risk of actually choosing. So I should just choose, even without perfect information? You should choose with sufficient information, not perfect information. Sufficient, and then trust God with the outcome. His words stuck with me. Sufficient information versus perfect information. I'd been waiting for perfect. But what if that was impossible? What if sufficient was all I'd ever get? On Monday morning, I walked into Helen's office before I could overthink it. "I want the promotion," I said. "I accept the team lead position." She looked genuinely surprised. "You're sure?" "I'm not perfectly certain I'll be great at it, but I'm sufficiently certain that I can learn and grow into it. And I'd rather try and possibly struggle than stay stuck forever." She smiled. "That's the most decisive I've ever heard you be. Welcome to the leadership team." Walking back to my desk, I felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. I'd made a choice, without perfect certainty, without analyzing every possible outcome. And I hadn't died. The world hadn't ended. I'd just decided. That evening at the Wednesday group, I shared about accepting the promotion. I still don't know if it's the right choice, but I made a choice, and that feels huge. Derek, who talked to me after the first meeting, grinned. "That's exactly it. You made a decision without perfect certainty. That's growth." Lisa added, "Now you'll learn something important. Most decisions aren't as irreversible as we think. If the promotion doesn't work out, you can adjust, you can learn, you can even go back to your old role if needed. But staying paralyzed forever, that's the real trap." A new member, a man named Tom, spoke up. "How did you do it? How did you stop analyzing long enough to decide?" "Honestly, I just forced myself to stop, set a deadline, and chose with the information I had instead of waiting for information I'd never get." But weren't you terrified you were wrong? Yes, still am, actually. But I'm learning that being terrified and still acting, that's faith, that's trust. It's not having perfect certainty and then acting. It's acting despite uncertainty. Pastor James nodded. That's exactly right, Ryan. Faith isn't the absence of doubt. It's trusting God even in the presence of doubt. It's acting on what you know, even when you don't know everything. After the meeting, I texted Sarah. I accepted the promotion, made a decision without endless analysis. Can we talk about us this weekend? She responded immediately. I'm proud of you. Yes, let's talk. Over the next few days, I started noticing my overthinking patterns more clearly. Every decision, what to eat, what to wear, which route to drive, triggered analysis. And I started practicing something the group had taught me, the good enough principle. Instead of researching restaurants for 30 minutes, I picked one that seemed good enough. Instead of agonizing over my outfit, I wore something that looked fine. Instead of analyzing traffic routes, I took my usual way. Small decisions, but practicing making them without excessive analysis. Building the muscle of choosing with sufficient information instead of perfect information. At work, the team lead transition began, and immediately I was faced with decisions I couldn't fully analyze. Staffing choices, project priorities, deadline negotiations, things that required judgment calls without perfect data. My instinct was to research endlessly, to analyze every angle before deciding. But I remembered, sufficient information, not perfect information. Make the call. Trust God with the outcome. It was terrifying, but also strangely freeing. On Saturday, Sarah and I met for dinner. Real dinner, not coffee shop conversation, and I could tell she was nervous. Sarah, I need to tell you something, I started. I've been unfair to you. For 3 years, I've been analyzing our relationship instead of living it, trying to achieve perfect certainty about whether you're the one before committing. But I've realized something. That certainty doesn't exist. Not for anyone. What are you saying? I'm saying I've been waiting for a feeling of absolute certainty that never comes. But here's what I do know. I love you. I enjoy being with you. I respect you. We work well together. We have compatible values and goals. That's sufficient information. I don't need perfect certainty to move forward. I need to trust that we can build something good together. She was quiet, processing. So, what does that mean? It means I want to move forward, not in some vague, someday way. Actually move forward. I want us to start looking at our future seriously. Talk about marriage, about building a life together. Not because I've analyzed every possible outcome and know for certain it'll be perfect, but because I'm choosing to trust. Trust you, trust us, trust God, instead of waiting for impossible certainty. Tears were forming in her eyes. You have no idea how long I've waited to hear you say something like that. I know. I'm sorry it took so long. I've been so afraid of choosing wrong that I nearly chose nothing, but I'm learning that choosing nothing is worse than potentially choosing imperfectly. We talked for hours about what we wanted, about fears and hopes, about timelines. And for the first time, I wasn't analyzing whether we were compatible. I was planning a future with her, not because I had perfect certainty, but because I was choosing to trust. That night, I wrote in a journal I'd started keeping. 2 weeks ago, I heard words that are changing everything. You think too much, but I already have the answer. This week, I accepted the promotion, not because I was perfectly certain I'd succeed, but because I had sufficient information and chose to trust. Tonight, I told Sarah I want to move forward, not because I've eliminated all uncertainty about our relationship, but because I'm done waiting for perfect certainty that will never come. I'm learning something crucial. Overthinking isn't wisdom. It's fear disguised as prudence. Real wisdom is gathering sufficient information and then trusting. Trusting God, trusting the process, trusting that I can handle whatever comes. I still want to analyze everything. That instinct hasn't disappeared. But I'm learning to recognize it, to interrupt it, to choose action over endless analysis. God says He already has the answer. I'm learning to trust that even when I can't see the answer perfectly. That's terrifying, but it's also the only way forward. 2 weeks in, and I'd made 2 major decisions, accepted the promotion, committed to moving forward with Sarah, neither with perfect certainty, both with sufficient information and trust. It was just the beginning, but it was something. And that something felt like freedom I hadn't experienced in years. 3 weeks into learning that I thought too much, I discovered that breaking the overthinking pattern required constant, deliberate practice. The promotion had started, and immediately I was tested. My first major decision as team lead, choosing between 2 project approaches. One was safer, more conventional, with predictable outcomes. The other was riskier, more innovative, with uncertain results but higher potential. My old pattern would have been to spend weeks analyzing both options, researching similar cases, creating elaborate projections, but I gave myself 2 days, gathered the essential information, consulted with key people, and then I made the call. We'd go with the innovative approach. "Are you sure?" one of my team members asked. "I'm sufficiently sure," I said. "Not perfectly certain, but confident enough to commit and see what happens." It felt foreign coming out of my mouth. Admitting I wasn't perfectly certain, but choosing anyway. But it also felt honest, real, because the truth was, I'd never be perfectly certain. That level of certainty didn't exist. At home, Sarah and I had started looking at rings. Actually looking, not just talking about maybe someday looking. And my overthinking brain wanted to research diamond cuts, settings, price points, jewelers, market trends. Wanted to spend months finding the objectively perfect ring. But I caught myself. "Sarah, help me not overthink this. What do you actually want in a ring?" She showed me a few examples, simple, classic, nothing overly elaborate, and I realized she didn't need me to find the perfect ring. She needed me to choose something beautiful and commit to it. The ring was a symbol, not the point. We went to 3 jewelers. I asked questions, looked at options, and then, instead of saying I needed to research more, I chose one. Right there. Made the decision. Sarah looked shocked. "You're not going to think about it?" "I've seen enough to know this is beautiful, high quality, and what you want. I don't need to research 17 more jewelers. I need to commit." Tears formed in her eyes. "You're really changing." "I'm trying. It's hard, but I'm trying." At the Wednesday group, I shared about both decisions, the work project and the ring. I'm practicing making decisions without perfect information, and it's terrifying. What if I'm wrong? What if the project fails? What if there was a better ring? Tom, who'd been coming for 3 weeks now, said, "But what's the alternative? Spending months analyzing and missing the opportunity? Never proposing because you can't find the perfect ring? I guess that would be worse," Pastor James added. "Ryan, I want you to consider something. You're overthinking. It's not actually about making the right choice. It's about controlling the outcome. You think if you analyze enough, you can eliminate risk. But life doesn't work that way. Risk exists, uncertainty exists, and no amount of analysis can change that." His words stung because they were true. I'd been using analysis as a way to feel in control, to feel like I could predict and manage every outcome. But that was an illusion. "So what's the alternative?" I asked. "Trust. Real trust. Not analyzing until you feel certain and then calling that trust, but actually acting without certainty and trusting God with the outcome." Over the next week, I practiced this principle in small ways. At the grocery store, instead of reading every label and comparing every option, I grabbed what looked good enough and moved on. At restaurants, I ordered within 2 minutes instead of analyzing the entire menu. When my apartment complex raised rent, I made a decision about whether to stay or move within a day instead of months. Small decisions. But each one was practice. Practice choosing with sufficient information. Practice trusting instead of over-analyzing. The work project became my biggest test. We'd committed to the innovative approach, and now we had to execute it. And immediately, problems arose. things we hadn't anticipated, challenges that couldn't have been predicted through more analysis. My instinct was to panic, to think, see, this is why I should have analyzed more. I made the wrong choice. But Derek from the group had told me something useful. When challenges arise, it doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're facing the normal complications of any choice. The question isn't whether you chose perfectly. It's how you handle the challenges that come. So instead of spiraling into analysis paralysis about whether I'd chosen wrong, I focused on solving the problems in front of us, adjusting, adapting, moving forward, and slowly the project started working. Not perfectly, not without complications, but working. Sarah had been watching my changes. One evening she said, "You seem different, less tense, less in your head all the time. I feel different, like I'm actually living my life instead of just thinking about how to live it. What changed? I'm learning that overthinking isn't safety. It feels like safety, like if I just think hard enough, I can avoid mistakes. But really, it's prison. It keeps me stuck. And learning to act without perfect certainty, that's actually freedom. Are you going to propose soon?" The old me would have said, "I need to plan more, need to find the perfect time, the perfect way." But I smiled. Yes, soon. I'm not going to tell you exactly when, because I want it to be a surprise, but soon. I'm done waiting for perfect certainty. At the next Sunday service, Pastor James preached on Hebrews 11, the faith chapter. All the people who acted on faith without perfect certainty. Abraham, leaving his home, not knowing where he was going. Moses, confronting Pharaoh without knowing how it would end. People who trusted God enough to move forward, even when they couldn't see the full path. Notice none of these people had perfect certainty, Pastor James said. None of them had all the answers before they acted. They had sufficient information and a call from God, and they moved forward. That's faith. Not having all the answers, but trusting the one who does. After the service, a woman I'd seen at the Wednesday group approached me. "I heard you share last week about the ring. I've been stuck in a similar pattern, analyzing whether to go back to school. I've been researching programs for 2 years, never applying, always finding another factor to consider. But hearing you just choose, I think I need to do that too. Just apply and see what happens." Her words reminded me, my journey wasn't just personal. Other people were watching, and my willingness to act without perfect certainty was giving them permission to do the same. That week, I had a conversation with my sister that crystallized something. She called asking for advice about her career. I started launching into analysis, pros and cons, factors to consider, research she should do. And then I caught myself. "Actually, Sarah, let me tell you what I'm learning. You could analyze this forever, but at some point, you need to make the call with the information you have. Not perfect information, sufficient information, and trust that God will work through whatever you choose. That's not like you. You usually help me analyze every angle." I know, but I'm learning that's not actually helpful. It's just overthinking, enabling more overthinking. Sometimes the best help is encouraging someone to decide and trust, not to analyze more. She was quiet. "You're right, I think I know what I want to do. I've just been scared to commit." Then commit, make the choice. Trust it'll work out. After we hung up, I realized I'd just given advice I was learning to follow myself, and it felt right. Not because I had perfect certainty that her choice would work perfectly, but because I was learning that acting with sufficient information was better than staying stuck forever. That evening, I sat with the ring I'd bought, planning when to propose, and my overthinking brain wanted to analyze what's the perfect time, the perfect place, the perfect words. But I interrupted that pattern. I knew Sarah. I knew she didn't need perfect. She needed real. She needed me to stop analyzing and start living. So I decided this weekend, Saturday evening, at the park where we'd had our first date, not because it was objectively perfect, but because it was meaningful and good enough, and I was done waiting for perfect. I wrote in my journal that night, 3 weeks ago, I heard words that are transforming my life. You think too much, but I already have the answer. I'm learning what this means in practice. It means gathering sufficient information, not perfect information. It means making decisions and trusting God with the outcomes. It means recognizing that overthinking is control disguised as wisdom. The work project is challenging, but it's working. The ring is chosen. The proposal is planned. Sarah is seeing me change. My sister is learning from watching me. And I'm discovering that life on the other side of overthinking is actually fuller, not emptier. I'm still tempted to overanalyze. That instinct is strong, but I'm getting better at recognizing it and interrupting it, at saying, I have sufficient information. I can decide now. I can trust. God says He already has the answer. I'm learning that means I don't have to figure out every detail. I can act on what I know and trust Him with what I don't know. That's faith, real faith, and it's harder and more freeing than I ever imagined. 3 weeks in, and I'd accepted a promotion, bought a ring, made hard decisions at work, and was preparing to propose. None of it with perfect certainty, all of it with sufficient information and trust. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually living instead of just thinking about living. 1 month into learning that I thought too much, I faced a moment that would either prove I'd changed or reveal I was still trapped in the same patterns. Saturday morning arrived, the day I'd decided to propose to Sarah, and my overthinking brain immediately went into overdrive. What if the weather is bad? What if she's having a bad day? What if the timing feels forced? What if I say the wrong thing? What if the park is too crowded? What if this isn't romantic enough? What if I'm making a mistake? I caught myself spiraling and forced a pause. This was exactly the pattern I'd been learning to break, the endless what-ifs that prevented action. I called Derek from the Wednesday group. I'm proposing today, and I'm panicking. My brain is finding every possible reason why today might be wrong. Of course it is. That's what your brain does. But Ryan, let me ask you, do you love Sarah? Yes. Do you want to marry her? Yes. Do you have the ring? Yes. Then you have sufficient information. The rest is just fear disguised as analysis. Go propose, today, like you planned. His words steadied me. I had sufficient information. Everything else was overthinking. That evening, I picked Sarah up. She thought we were just going for a walk in the park, our usual Saturday routine. But I had the ring in my pocket, my heart pounding. As we walked to the spot where we'd had our first date 3 years ago, my mind kept trying to analyze, is this the right moment? Should I wait until sunset? What if someone interrupts? What if I interrupted the thoughts? This was it, right now. Not because the moment was perfect, but because I was choosing to trust. Sarah, I said, my voice shaking slightly. 3 years ago, we stood right here on our first date, and I remember thinking I needed to analyze whether you were right for me, whether we were compatible, whether this could work. She looked at me, sensing something significant was happening. I spent 3 years analyzing, overthinking, trying to achieve perfect certainty before committing. And a month ago, you told me I was so afraid of choosing wrong that I wasn't choosing at all. You were right. I got down on one knee, pulling out the ring. I'm done waiting for perfect certainty. I love you. I want to build a life with you. Not because I've analyzed every possible outcome, but because I'm choosing to trust. Trust you, trust us, trust God. Sarah, will you marry me? She was crying, nodding. Yes, yes, of course, yes. I stood up, slid the ring on her finger, and kissed her. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete presence. Not thinking about whether this was the right choice, not analyzing outcomes, just being fully in the moment. You really did it, she said, laughing through tears. You actually just decided and did it. I'm learning. It's hard, but I'm learning. We spent the rest of the evening celebrating, calling family, taking photos, and every time my brain tried to analyze, did I propose the right way? Should I have waited for a more elaborate setup? I shut it down. The moment had been real, genuine, meaningful. That was enough. At the Sunday service the next day, I could barely focus on Pastor James's sermon. My mind kept drifting to the fact that I was engaged, that I'd made a huge life decision without perfect certainty, and I hadn't died. Life was actually better. After the service, Pastor James approached me. "You look different today. Happy. What's going on?" "I proposed yesterday." She said yes. He broke into a huge grin. "Ryan, that's wonderful. Congratulations." I almost didn't do it. My brain was finding every reason to wait, to analyze more, to be more certain. But I remembered what you said. Faith is acting without perfect certainty and trusting God with the outcome. And how does it feel? Terrifying, amazing, free, all at the same time. That's what real living feels like. Not safe, not perfectly controlled, but real. At work on Monday, the innovative project I'd greenlit was hitting significant challenges, the kind of challenges that made me question whether I'd made the right choice. My old pattern would have been to spiral. See, this proves I should have analyzed more. I made the wrong call. I'm not qualified for this role, but I remembered what Derek had said. Challenges don't mean you chose wrong. They mean you're facing the normal complications of any choice. So instead of panicking, I gathered my team. Okay, we're facing obstacles we didn't anticipate. That's normal. Let's focus on solving the problems in front of us rather than questioning whether we chose the right approach. One team member, Jessica, looked relieved. "I was worried you'd pull the plug on the whole project." "No, we committed to this approach. Now we adapt and solve. That's how innovation works. You can't predict every challenge through analysis. You have to move forward and handle problems as they arise." Helen, my boss, stopped by later that afternoon. "I heard about the project challenges. How are you handling it?" "We're solving the problems, learning as we go." She smiled. "That's good leadership, Ryan. A month ago you would have been paralyzed by this, questioning every decision. But now you're just leading, making calls, moving forward. That's growth." Her words meant more than she knew. Because she was right. A month ago, this would have sent me into analysis paralysis. Now, I was just handling it. At the Wednesday group that evening, I shared about the proposal and the work challenges. I'm learning something important. Life is messy regardless of how much you analyze. You can't predict every obstacle. You can't eliminate all uncertainty. So you might as well act with sufficient information and handle problems as they come. Tom, who'd been coming for a month now, said, "That's exactly what I needed to hear. I've been stuck in this pattern of thinking that if I just analyze enough, I can avoid all problems. But that's not realistic, is it? No, problems are part of life. The question isn't whether you can avoid them through analysis. It's whether you can handle them when they come." Lisa added, "I've been watching your journey, Ryan. A month ago, you couldn't make any decision. Now you've accepted a promotion, proposed to your fiancé, and you're handling work crises. That's remarkable transformation." "It doesn't feel remarkable. It feels like constant practice. Every day I have to choose. Do I spiral into analysis, or do I trust and act?" Pastor James spoke up, and that's exactly right. This isn't a one-time transformation. It's a daily practice, choosing trust over analysis, choosing action over paralysis. Some days are easier than others, but you're building the muscle. A new member, a woman named Rachel, raised her hand tentatively. "Can I ask something? How do you know when you have sufficient information? I struggle with that. I always feel like I need just a little more data." I thought about it. Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. But here's what I've learned. If you're waiting to feel completely certain, you're waiting forever. Sufficient information isn't about feeling certain. It's about having enough to make a reasonable decision. You know the key factors. You've considered the major implications. You've consulted people whose input matters. That's sufficient. You won't have every answer, but you have enough. But what if I'm wrong? Then you adjust. You learn. You handle the consequences. But staying stuck forever because you might be wrong, that's worse than being wrong and learning from it. After the meeting, Derek pulled me aside. Man, you're becoming a leader in this group. People are learning from watching you. I don't feel like a leader. I feel like I'm barely figuring this out myself. That's exactly why you're helpful. You're not teaching from a place of having arrived. You're teaching from a place of actively learning. That's what people need to see. Over the next few days, Sarah and I started planning the wedding. And immediately, my overthinking brain wanted to engage. What venue? What date? What style? What budget? What about the guest list? The vendors? The timeline? But Sarah stopped me. Ryan, let's not turn this into another analysis project. Let's make decisions that feel right and move forward. We don't need the perfect wedding. We need our wedding. She was right. And she was also helping me recognize the pattern when it emerged. We set some basic parameters, budget range, general time frame, size, and then we started making decisions, not overthinking each one, just choosing. When we found a venue we liked, instead of visiting 15 more to compare, we booked it. When we met with a photographer whose work we loved, we hired them. When we tasted food from a caterer that was delicious, we committed. Each decision felt both liberating and scary. But each one proved that we could choose without perfect certainty, and it would be okay. At my next therapy session, I'd started seeing a therapist named Dr. Martinez at Pastor James's recommendation. We talked about the changes I'd been experiencing. A month ago, you were completely paralyzed by overthinking. Now you're engaged, succeeding in a leadership role, making decisions rapidly. What's driving the change? I think I finally accepted that perfect certainty doesn't exist, and that waiting for it means never living. I'd rather make decisions with sufficient information and handle whatever comes than stay stuck forever. That's profound growth, but I want you to be aware, this pattern might try to come back, especially under stress. Overthinking is a coping mechanism. When you feel out of control, your brain will want to analyze everything as a way to feel in control again. So, what do I do when that happens? Recognize it. Name it. Remind yourself, this is my brain trying to feel in control through analysis. But real security doesn't come from controlling outcomes through overthinking. It comes from trusting that I can handle whatever comes. Her words gave me a framework. Overthinking was my brain's attempt to feel safe through control. But real safety came from trust, not control. That Sunday, Pastor James preached on Proverbs 16:9. In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Notice it doesn't say don't plan, Pastor James said. It says plan, but recognize that God ultimately directs your path. You can make your plans. You should make your plans, but hold them loosely. Trust that God is working even when things don't go exactly as you analyzed. After the service, multiple people approached me, congratulating me on the engagement. And each conversation reminded me, this change wasn't just personal. People were watching. And my transformation from paralyzed overthinker to decisive actor was giving them hope that they could change too. That evening, I updated my journal. 1 month ago, I heard words that began changing my life. You think too much, but I already have the answer. This month, I've lived those words. I've accepted a promotion. I've proposed to Sarah. I've made hard decisions at work. I've planned a wedding without analyzing every detail. I've faced challenges without spiraling into paralysis. I'm learning that overthinking isn't safety, it's prison. Real safety comes from trusting God and trusting that I can handle whatever comes, not from controlling outcomes through analysis. The work project has challenges. The wedding planning has complications. Life is messy, but I'm not paralyzed by that anymore. I'm just living, making decisions, adjusting as needed, moving forward. Sarah sees the change. My co-workers see it. The Wednesday group sees it. And I feel it. I'm present in my life instead of trapped in my head. God says He already has the answer. I'm learning to trust that, to act on sufficient information, to stop waiting for perfect certainty that will never come. This is what freedom feels like. not having all the answers, but trusting that it's okay to act without them. 1 month in, and my life was transformed, not because I'd stopped thinking entirely, but because I'd stopped letting overthinking control me. I was learning to gather sufficient information, make decisions, and trust God with the outcomes. And for someone who'd spent years paralyzed by analysis, that felt like a miracle. 6 weeks into learning that I thought too much, I faced a crisis that tested everything I'd been learning. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah's voice was shaking. "Ryan, I need you to come to the hospital. It's my dad. He had a heart attack." My brain immediately wanted to spiral into analysis mode. How bad is it? What are the options? What should we do? What if he doesn't make it? But I caught myself. This wasn't a time for analysis. This was a time for presence. "I'm on my way. Text me which hospital." I told Helen I had a family emergency and left immediately. During the 20-minute drive, my overthinking brain kept trying to engage. Should I call someone? Should I research heart attack recovery rates? Should I plan for different scenarios? But I kept interrupting. Right now, I just need to get there, be present, support Sarah. That's sufficient. At the hospital, Sarah was in the waiting room with her mother and sister. I held her as she cried. "They're doing emergency surgery. We don't know how bad it is yet. We won't know for hours." Udi. The next 6 hours were excruciating, waiting, not knowing, and my brain desperately wanted to do something, research, analyze, plan, anything to feel like I had control over a situation where I had no control. But I forced myself to just be present, to sit with Sarah, to hold her hand, to pray with her family, to not try to fix or analyze or control, just to be there. When the surgeon finally came out, the news was both good and bad. Sarah's dad had survived the surgery, but he'd had significant heart damage. The next 48 hours would be critical, and even if he recovered, his life would be different. Medications, lifestyle changes, potentially reduced capacity. Over the next few days, Sarah and I were at the hospital constantly, and I watched my old patterns trying to resurface. Every doctor update, I wanted to research implications. Every decision about his care, I wanted to analyze all options. Every uncertainty, I wanted to overthink until I felt in control. But I kept catching myself. This wasn't my crisis to control. This was a situation to walk through with trust and presence. I could support Sarah and her family without trying to analyze my way to certainty about outcomes. At the Wednesday group, I was honest about struggling. Sarah's dad had a heart attack, and all my old overthinking patterns are trying to come back. I want to research everything, analyze every option, feel like I have control, but I can't control this. And I'm learning to be okay with that. Pastor James nodded. Crisis reveals our default patterns. When you feel powerless, your brain wants to grasp for control through analysis. That's normal. What matters is whether you recognize it and choose differently. Derek added, how are you actually handling it, day to day? I keep interrupting the overthinking, reminding myself I can't control his recovery through analysis. I can only be present, support Sarah, trust God, make decisions as they come, rather than trying to predict and plan for every scenario. Tom said, that sounds exhausting. It is, but you know what's more exhausting? Trying to control outcomes through overthinking. That's impossible and draining. This, just being present and trusting, it's hard, but it's sustainable. Lisa spoke up. I had a similar crisis last year. My mom's cancer diagnosis, and I remember wanting to research every treatment, analyze every option, control every outcome. But eventually I realized I can be informed without being obsessed. I can support without controlling. That's what you're learning. Her words helped. I wasn't alone in this pattern, and others had walked through similar crises and learned to trust instead of over-control. Sarah's dad slowly improved over the next week, moved from ICU to a regular room, started physical therapy, began the long road of recovery. And throughout it, Sarah watched me handle the uncertainty differently than I would have 2 months ago. You're different. she said one evening as we drove home from the hospital. The old you would have been researching heart disease obsessively, creating recovery plans, analyzing every doctor's statement, but you're just here, present, trusting. I still want to do all those things. My brain still tries to spiral, but I'm learning that's not helpful. Not for your dad, not for you, not for me. What helps is being present and handling each decision as it comes. Thank you for that, for not making this harder by trying to control everything. The crisis with her dad brought another challenge. Wedding planning had to be put on hold. We'd made good progress, but now Sarah needed to focus on her family. And the old me would have spiraled. What does this mean for our timeline? Should we postpone? Should we change our plans? What if his recovery takes longer than expected? But I didn't spiral. I simply said, Sarah, we'll figure out the wedding when we need to. Right now, your dad and your family are the priority. We can adapt our plans as needed. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. You really have changed. A few months ago, you would have been analyzing every implication of this delay. But you're just adapting, trusting it'll work out. I'm learning that flexibility is more valuable than perfect plans. We had plans. Now, circumstances have changed. We'll adjust. That's okay. At work, the innovative project continued to face challenges, and now, with the stress of Sarah's dad's situation, I could feel my overthinking patterns pulling even harder. My brain wanted to cope with feeling powerless in one area by over-controlling in another, but I recognized the pattern. In my next session with Dr. Martinez, I talked about it. I notice when I feel out of control in one area, like with Sarah's dad, my brain tries to compensate by over-controlling in other areas, analyzing work decisions more than necessary, planning excessively. It's like my brain is trying to find somewhere to grasp control. That's very insightful, Ryan. That's exactly what happens. When we feel powerless, we often try to over-control the things we think we can control. But what's the problem with that? It doesn't actually give me real control. It just exhausts me and creates problems where there weren't any. I start overthinking decisions that were fine, creating complications through analysis. Right. So what's the alternative? Accept that I can't control everything. Make decisions with sufficient information in all areas of my life. Trust God with outcomes in all areas. Not try to compensate for uncertainty in one place by over-controlling elsewhere. That's mature wisdom. Can you practice that this week? I did practice it. When work decisions came up, I made them with appropriate analysis, not excessive analysis as a coping mechanism. When wedding questions arose, Sarah and I made simple decisions without overcomplicating them. When uncertainty about her dad's recovery surfaced, I acknowledged it without trying to research my way to false certainty. It was hard, really hard, because my brain kept offering the familiar pattern. If you just analyze more, you'll feel better. If you just plan more, you'll feel in control. But I knew that was a lie. Overthinking didn't actually make me feel better or give me control. It just created the illusion of both while exhausting me. 2 weeks after her dad's heart attack, Sarah and I had a conversation that revealed how much I'd changed. I want to set a new wedding date, she said. Dad's going to be okay. He'll need time to recover, but I don't want to put our life on hold indefinitely. What do you think? The old me would have said, let me analyze his recovery timeline, research typical heart attack recovery periods, consider all the factors, make spreadsheets comparing different date options. Instead, I said, what date feels right to you? She smiled. I like that answer. I was expecting you to want to analyze it for a week. I'm learning that some decisions don't need extensive analysis. You know your dad. You know what feels right for our family. If you think 6 months from now is reasonable, let's do it. 6 months. You're okay with that timeline? Yes, we have sufficient information to make that call. We can adjust if needed, but let's commit and move forward. We set the date that night, just decided, and I felt free, not anxious about whether we'd chosen perfectly, just at peace with choosing and trusting. At the Sunday service, Pastor James preached on James 4:13-15 about people who make plans saying, "Today or tomorrow we will go to this city and spend a year there and do business," without acknowledging that they don't know what tomorrow brings. Notice James isn't saying don't make plans, Pastor James explained. He's saying make plans, but hold them with humility. Say, if the Lord wills, we will do this or that. Recognize that you can plan, but you're not ultimately in control. God is. His words resonated deeply. I'd been learning to make plans without overthinking them, but I was also learning to hold those plans loosely, to adapt when circumstances changed, to trust that God was working even when things didn't go exactly as I'd planned. After the service, Rachel, the woman from the group who'd asked about sufficient information, approached me. "I've been watching your journey, and I want you to know, you've helped me. I've spent 5 years trying to decide whether to change careers, analyzing endlessly, never acting. But watching you make decisions and trust, I finally applied for a new job last week. I got it. I start next month." Her words moved me. My transformation wasn't just personal, it was rippling out, giving others permission to stop overthinking and start living. "That's amazing, Rachel. How does it feel?" "Terrifying, but also freeing. I don't know if it's the perfect choice, but it's a good choice, and I'm trusting that's enough." That's exactly it. Good enough, not perfect. That's all we ever get. At the Wednesday group that evening, I shared about the past 2 weeks. Sarah's dad's continued recovery, setting the wedding date, the work challenges I was navigating. "I'm learning that life doesn't pause for you to analyze it perfectly," I said. "Crises happen, circumstances change, challenges arise. You can't overthink your way to certainty about any of it. You can only handle what's in front of you with sufficient information and trust." Tom nodded. "That's what I'm struggling with. I keep thinking if I just analyze more, I can predict problems and prevent them. But that's not realistic, is it? No, you can't predict everything. And even if you could, you couldn't prevent everything. Life is inherently uncertain. The question is, will you let that uncertainty paralyze you, or will you trust and move forward anyway? A new member, a young man named Chris, spoke up. "But isn't it irresponsible not to analyze thoroughly? Isn't overthinking just being careful?" "I used to think that," I said, "but I've learned there's a difference between being careful and being paralyzed. Careful means gathering sufficient information and making informed decisions. Paralyzed means analyzing endlessly because you're afraid to commit." I thought I was being careful, but I was actually just scared. Pastor James added, "There's a place for thoughtfulness, for consideration, for wisdom. But when analysis becomes avoidance, when you're using thinking as a way to delay action indefinitely, that's not wisdom anymore. That's fear." After the meeting, Derek pulled me aside. "You're becoming a real leader in this community. People look up to you." "I don't feel like a leader. I still struggle. Sarah's dad's crisis brought up all my old patterns. I have to fight the overthinking every day." "That's exactly why you're a good leader. You're honest about the struggle. You show people it's possible to change without pretending it's easy. That's what we need." Driving home, I thought about the past 6 weeks. I'd gotten engaged, faced a family health crisis, continued succeeding in a leadership role at work, set a wedding date, all while actively fighting my tendency to overthink. The old patterns weren't gone. They still tried to surface, especially under stress. But I was getting better at recognizing them and choosing differently, better at interrupting the spiral, better at trusting instead of over-controlling. That night I updated my journal. 6 weeks ago, I heard words that continue to transform me. "You think too much, but I already have the answer." This has been the hardest 2 weeks of this journey. Sarah's dad's heart attack brought up every old pattern, every instinct to control through analysis, every desire to research my way to certainty about outcomes. But I'm learning that crisis reveals whether you've really changed or just changed when things are easy. And I'm discovering I have changed, not perfectly, not without struggle, but really, I'm being present instead of over-analyzing. I'm making decisions with sufficient information instead of waiting for perfect information. I'm trusting God with outcomes instead of trying to control everything through overthinking. The work project is succeeding. Sarah and I set a wedding date, just decided without endless analysis. Her dad is recovering. Life is messy and uncertain, but I'm not paralyzed by that anymore. I'm learning that God really does have the answer. Not that He gives me perfect certainty before I act, but that He's working even when I can't see the full picture, even when circumstances change, even when crises hit. My job isn't to figure everything out, it's to trust, to act on what I know, to adapt when needed, to be present for the people I love. That's freedom, real freedom, not having all the answers, but trusting that it's okay not to have them. 6 weeks in, and I'd faced my biggest test yet, a crisis that would have sent the old me into analysis paralysis, but instead I'd walked through it with trust and presence, and that proved to me the change was real. Not complete, but real. And that was enough. 2 months into learning that I thought too much, I discovered that transformation creates unexpected opportunities. Sarah's dad was home from the hospital, recovering steadily. The wedding planning was back on track with our 6-month timeline. The innovative project at work had overcome its initial challenges and was succeeding beyond expectations. And I was learning to navigate life without constant overthinking. But then, something unexpected happened. Helen called me into her office one morning. "Ryan, I want to talk to you about something. The leadership team has been impressed with your transformation over the past 2 months. The way you've stepped into the team lead role, made decisive calls, handled the project challenges. It's been remarkable. Thank you. I've been working on it. We can tell. And we want to offer you another opportunity, Director of Analytics. It's a significant step up, more responsibility, bigger team, strategic role. But here's the thing, we need an answer within a week. The position needs to be filled quickly." My immediate instinct was to panic. Director, that's huge. I need to analyze whether I'm ready, research what the role entails, create comparison matrices, talk to people in similar positions, consider every angle. I caught myself. This was the pattern, the old pattern, and I'd learned that this pattern didn't help. It paralyzed. "Can I have until Friday to think about it? 3 days. 3 days works, but Ryan, I need you to actually decide in 3 days, not ask for more time." "Understood. I'll give you an answer Friday." Walking back to my desk, my heart was pounding. Part of me was excited. Part of me was terrified. But the bigger part was simply aware. This is a test. Can I apply what I've learned to a really big decision? Can I decide in 3 days instead of 3 months? That evening, I talked to Sarah about it. Director of Analytics. It's what I've wanted career-wise, but it's happening fast, and my brain wants to overthink everything about it. What would you tell someone in the Wednesday group who was facing this decision? Her question stopped me. I'd tell them to gather sufficient information, not perfect information, to consider the key factors without analyzing every possibility, to make the decision and trust. So take your own advice. She was right. I needed to practice what I'd been preaching. Over the next 2 days, I did focused research. Not obsessive research, focused. I talked to Helen about the role's specifics. I consulted with 2 people who held director positions. I thought honestly about whether I wanted it and whether I could grow into it. And by Thursday evening, I had my answer. I wanted it. I was sufficiently confident I could do it. And even if I struggled initially, I'd learn and grow. That was enough information. Friday morning, I walked into Helen's office. "I want the position. I accept the director role." She smiled. "You decided in 3 days. The old Ryan would have needed 3 months and still not been sure. What changed?" I learned that perfect certainty doesn't exist, and waiting for it means missing opportunities. I have sufficient information. I'm choosing to trust. Well, welcome to the director team. You start officially next month. At the Wednesday group that evening, I shared about the opportunity and my decision. 3 months ago, I couldn't decide about team lead after 6 months. This week, I decided about director in 3 days. That's how much I've changed. Tom looked amazed. How did you decide that fast? Wasn't it terrifying? Yes, it was terrifying. But here's what I've learned. The terror doesn't go away with more analysis. You just have to act despite it. I gathered the key information. I considered whether I wanted it and whether I could do it. That was sufficient. Everything else would have just been overthinking, Rachel added. You're modeling something really powerful, that you can make big decisions without perfect certainty. That's what a lot of us need to see. Chris, the young man who'd questioned whether analysis was being careful, spoke up. I've been watching you for a month now, and I'm starting to realize I've been using analysis as a shield, protecting myself from risk by never committing. But you're showing me that's not protection. That's just staying stuck. Exactly. I thought analysis made me safe, but really, it kept me paralyzed. Acting with sufficient information and trusting, that actually moves your life forward. A new member, a woman named Jennifer, raised her hand. Can I ask something? How do you handle it when you make a decision and then wonder if you chose wrong? I'm still learning that. But here's what I'm practicing. I remind myself that I made the decision with the information I had. Second-guessing afterwards doesn't help. If I need to adjust based on new information, I will. But rethinking the decision endlessly is just more overthinking. Pastor James nodded. That's wisdom, Ryan. Once you've decided, commit to the decision. You can always adjust later if needed, but constantly questioning your past choices keeps you stuck. After the meeting, Derek approached me with another man I hadn't met. Ryan, this is Marcus. He's been dealing with analysis paralysis for years. I told him he should talk to you. Marcus looked desperate. I've been trying to decide whether to leave my job for 3 years. 3 years. I've analyzed every angle, but I can't commit. How did you break out of that? I invited him to coffee, and we talked for an hour. I shared my story, the 6 months not deciding about the promotion, the 3 years unable to commit to Sarah, the way overthinking had paralyzed my entire life, and how hearing, "You think too much, but I already have the answer," had started changing everything. The turning point, I told him, was realizing that perfect certainty doesn't exist. You'll never have all the answers. You'll never eliminate all risk. So you can either wait forever for impossible certainty, or you can act on sufficient information and trust. But what if I make the wrong choice? Then you'll handle it. You'll learn. You'll adjust. But staying stuck for 3 years, that's not safer than potentially choosing imperfectly. That's just wasted time. I saw something shift in his eyes. I think I've been waiting for the decision to feel easy. For one option to be so obviously right that there's no risk. That won't happen. Good options often involve trade-offs. Neither is perfectly right. You just have to choose one and make it work. He thanked me and said he'd come to the Wednesday group. And I realized I was helping people now. Not from a place of having everything figured out, but from honestly sharing what I was learning. The following week, the announcement went out at work about my promotion to director. Several co-workers approached me to congratulate me, but one conversation stood out. A junior analyst named Ben pulled me aside. Can I ask you something? I've noticed you've changed a lot over the past few months. You used to seem really stressed, really in your head. Now you seem more present, decisive. What happened? I thought about how to answer honestly without oversimplifying. I realized I was letting overthinking control my life. I was so afraid of making wrong choices that I wasn't making any choices. And I started learning to trust. Trust God, trust the process, trust that I could handle whatever came, instead of trying to control everything through analysis. That's exactly what I struggle with. I analyze everything to death. Can you tell me more? We met for lunch later that week, and I shared more of my story. About the Wednesday group, about learning the difference between wisdom and overthinking, about choosing with sufficient information instead of waiting for perfect information. Would it be okay if I came to the group, he asked. Of course, that's what it's there for. Ben started coming to the Wednesday group, and so did Marcus, the man Derek had introduced me to, and Jennifer brought her sister. The group was growing, and I was becoming someone people came to for guidance. It was humbling and slightly terrifying. I still struggled sometimes, still caught myself wanting to overanalyze, still had moments of doubt. But I was further along the journey than others, and that made me useful to them. At Sunday service, Pastor James asked if I'd be willing to share a brief testimony about my transformation. I think the congregation needs to hear how God has worked in your life these past 2 months. I agreed, though the thought of speaking in front of hundreds of people made me nervous. But I was learning that doing things that made me nervous, without overthinking them first, was often the right choice. The following Sunday, I stood on stage and shared my story about being paralyzed by overthinking, about the 6 months unable to decide about a promotion, about the 3 years unable to commit to Sarah, about hearing, "You think too much, but I already have the answer," and beginning to change. God didn't give me perfect certainty before I acted, I said. He taught me to act with sufficient information and trust Him with the outcomes. And that's transformed everything. My career, my relationships, my ability to actually live my life instead of just thinking about living it. After the service, at least a dozen people approached me. Some wanted to join the Wednesday group. Some just wanted to say they related to the struggle. One man said, "I've been unable to make a major decision for 2 years, but hearing you, I think I can do it now. I think I can just choose and trust." And that week, I had lunch with Sarah to finalize some wedding details, and as we talked through decisions about flowers, music, vows, I noticed how differently we were operating than I would have 3 months ago. "This feels easy," Sarah observed. "We're just deciding things, not agonizing over them, because we're choosing with sufficient information. We know what we like. We know what matters to us. That's enough. We don't need to research 17 more florists or analyze every possible song choice." She smiled. "I love this version of you. Present, decisive, trusting. The man I said yes to. I'm still becoming this version, but I'm glad you see the change." At my next therapy session with Dr. Martinez, we reflected on the 2 months of transformation. When you started, you couldn't make any major decision. Now you've accepted 2 promotions, gotten engaged, navigated a family crisis, planned a wedding, and you're helping others overcome overthinking. That's remarkable progress. It doesn't feel remarkable. It feels like constant practice. Every day I have to choose. Will I overthink this or will I trust? But you're choosing trust more and more often. That's growth, and you're doing it even as life gets more complex. Bigger job, upcoming wedding, more responsibility. You're not waiting for life to be simple before you stop overthinking. You're learning to trust in the midst of complexity. I think the key has been recognizing that overthinking doesn't make life simpler. It just makes me feel stuck. Acting with sufficient information and adapting as needed, that actually works. That's profound wisdom. Many people never learn that. That evening at the Wednesday group, now up to 30 regular attendees, I shared about becoming a director, speaking at church, and helping others one-on-one. "I'm realizing something," I said. "My overthinking, the thing I was so ashamed of, the weakness I tried to hide, it's becoming useful now that I'm honest about it, because I understand the pattern from the inside. I know what it's like to be paralyzed by analysis, and that makes me able to help others who are stuck in the same place." Lisa smiled. "That's how God works. He redeems our struggles, uses them to help others. Your overthinking wasn't wasted. It's making you uniquely able to guide people out of it." Pastor James added, "That's the message of 2 Corinthians 1. God comforts us in our troubles so we can comfort others with the comfort we've received. Your transformation isn't just for you, it's for everyone watching, everyone who needs to know change is possible." Walking to my car that night, I thought about how different my life was from 2 months ago. I'd been paralyzed, stuck, unable to make any significant decision. Now, I was a director, planning a wedding, helping others, sharing my story publicly. And the change hadn't required becoming someone different, just learning to trust instead of over-control, to act on sufficient information instead of waiting for perfect certainty, to believe that God already had the answer even when I couldn't see it. In my journal I wrote, 2 months ago, I heard words that continue transforming me. You think too much, but I already have the answer. This week, I became a director, decided in 3 days instead of 3 months. That's how much I've changed. People are coming to me for guidance, not because I have everything figured out, but because I'm honest about the journey, about how hard it is to break the overthinking pattern, about how to choose with sufficient information, about how to trust when you can't see the full picture. My weakness, overthinking, is becoming my strength, not because I don't struggle anymore, but because I understand the struggle and can guide others through it. I'm learning that God doesn't waste our struggles. He redeems them, uses them to help others. My years of overthinking weren't wasted. They're making me able to help people who are stuck in the same pattern. That's grace. That's purpose. That's what it looks like when God takes our weakness and makes it useful. 2 months in, and my life was unrecognizable from where it started. Not because I'd become perfect, but because I'd learned to trust. And that trust was changing everything, for me and for everyone watching my journey. 3 months into learning that I thought too much, I faced a moment that made me question whether I'd really changed or just gotten lucky. The director role officially started, and with it came a level of complexity I hadn't anticipated. I was now responsible for 3 teams, about 20 people total, and strategic decisions that affected the entire company's data infrastructure. Every decision had massive implications, and my overthinking brain saw this as the perfect opportunity to resurface. It started small, a decision about which analytics platform to migrate to. There were 3 viable options, each with pros and cons. The old me would have spent months analyzing. The new me gave it 2 weeks of focused research and made a call, but then I started second-guessing. What if I'd missed something crucial? What if this platform doesn't scale the way we need? What if there's a better option I didn't consider? The what-ifs that I'd been successfully interrupting for 3 months came flooding back. I tried my usual tools, interrupting the thoughts, reminding myself I'd made the decision with sufficient information, trusting God with the outcome. But the doubt kept creeping in. At work, I became increasingly tense. Started checking and rechecking decisions I'd already made, lying awake at night, running through scenarios. The paralysis I thought I'd overcome was trying to return. Sarah noticed immediately. "Ryan, you're in your head again. You're overthinking. What's going on?" "The new role. It's bigger than I expected. Every decision has huge implications, and I'm terrified of making the wrong call." "But you've been making good decisions for 3 months. What changed?" "The stakes changed. When I was team lead, mistakes were manageable. Now, a wrong decision could affect the whole company." She looked at me seriously. "So you're letting fear pull you back into overthinking?" Her words stung because they were true. I'd learned to trust when the stakes felt manageable, but when the stakes increased, I was defaulting back to my old pattern, trying to achieve certainty through endless analysis. At the Wednesday group, I was honest about struggling. I thought I'd overcome overthinking, but it's coming back. The bigger the responsibility, the more my brain wants to analyze everything to death. Pastor James nodded. "Ryan, healing isn't linear. Growth doesn't mean you never struggle again. It means you know what to do when the struggle returns. So what do you know to do?" "I know I need to interrupt the overthinking, make decisions with sufficient information, trust God with outcomes, but it's harder when the stakes are high." Derek spoke up. "Is it though? Or is that just what your brain is telling you? Because honestly, the process is the same regardless of stakes. Gather sufficient information. Decide. Trust. The stakes being higher doesn't mean you need perfect certainty. It just means you need to trust more." His words challenged me. Was I right that higher stakes required more analysis? Or was that just my overthinking brain justifying itself? Lisa added, I went through this same thing. Thought I'd overcome my overthinking, then faced a bigger decision and fell right back into the pattern. But here's what I learned. The overthinking was actually about fear, not about the decision. I was afraid of being responsible for a bad outcome, so I tried to analyze my way to certainty. But that's not possible. You can't eliminate risk through analysis. You can only manage it through trust. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept spinning through work scenarios, analyzing past decisions, worrying about future ones. And around 2 a.m., exhausted and frustrated, I prayed. God, I thought I'd learned this. But I'm falling back into overthinking. The bigger the responsibility, the more my brain tries to control through analysis. I need help. I need to remember that you already have the answer, because right now I'm drowning in my own thoughts again. In the silence, I felt that familiar sense of clarity. Not a voice, but a thought that felt different from my anxious spiraling. The stakes haven't changed the truth. You still think too much. I still have the answer. Trust doesn't get easier when stakes are higher. Trust gets tested when stakes are higher. This is the test. I grabbed my journal and wrote down those words. Trust doesn't get easier when stakes are higher. Trust gets tested when stakes are higher. That reframed everything. This wasn't proof that I hadn't changed. This was a test of whether I'd really internalized what I'd learned. Could I trust when it was hard, when stakes were high, when fear was screaming at me to analyze more? The next morning, I met with Dr. Martinez for an emergency session. I told her about the return of overthinking, the sleepless nights, the constant second-guessing. Ryan, what did you expect? That you'd learn to trust once and never struggle again? I guess I thought 3 months of progress meant I'd overcome this. 3 months of progress means you've built tools and awareness. It doesn't mean you'll never be tempted to fall back into old patterns. The question isn't whether the temptation comes back. It's whether you recognize it and choose differently. But I'm not choosing differently. I'm overthinking again. Are you? Or are you catching yourself overthinking and fighting it? Because from what you've described, you're not paralyzed. You're still making decisions. You're just uncomfortable with the uncertainty. That's different from being stuck. She was right. I was uncomfortable, but I wasn't paralyzed. I'd made the platform decision. I was moving forward in my role. The overthinking was there, but it wasn't controlling me the way it had 3 months ago. So what do I do with the discomfort, with the fear that I'm making wrong choices? You feel it, acknowledge it, and act anyway. Fear doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It means you're doing something that matters, something with real stakes. You can feel afraid and still trust. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Over the next week, I practiced this. Every time my brain started spiraling into analysis, what if this decision is wrong? What if I missed something? I acknowledged it. I'm afraid. That's okay. I made this decision with sufficient information. I'm trusting God with the outcome. The fear doesn't mean I was wrong. It didn't make the fear go away, but it stopped the fear from controlling me. At work, I had a conversation with Helen that helped. Ryan, you seem tense since starting the director role. What's going on? I decided to be honest. I'm struggling with second-guessing my decisions. The stakes feel higher now, and my brain wants to overanalyze everything. Can I tell you something? Every director goes through this. The jump from leading a team to leading multiple teams, it's not just more responsibility. It's a different kind of responsibility. You're making decisions that affect lots of people. That's legitimately scary. So how do you handle it? I make the best decision I can with the information available. Then I commit to it. If new information comes up, I adjust. But I don't endlessly second guess, because that doesn't help. It just makes me less effective. What if you make a wrong decision? Then I handle it. I learn from it. I adjust. But I've learned that making a reasonable decision and committing to it is almost always better than being paralyzed by fear of making the wrong decision. Even if my choice isn't perfect, moving forward beats staying stuck. Her words echoed what I'd been learning, but hearing it from someone further along in leadership helped me trust it more. That Sunday, Pastor James preached on Peter walking on water. How Peter saw Jesus, stepped out of the boat, walked on water, and then looked at the waves and started to sink. Notice, Peter didn't sink because the waves suddenly got bigger, Pastor James said. He sank because he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the circumstances. He moved from trust to fear, and fear made him sink. Some of you have been trusting God. You've been walking in faith. But then the stakes got higher, the circumstances got scarier, and you took your eyes off Jesus and looked at the waves, and you started to sink. Not because God changed, not because your faith was fake, but because you shifted from trust to fear. His words pierced me. That's exactly what I'd done. I'd been trusting when things felt manageable. But when the stakes increased, I'd looked at the waves, the high stakes, the potential for failure, the massive implications, and I'd started to sink into overthinking. After the service, I found Pastor James. That sermon was for me. I've been looking at the waves, letting higher stakes pull me back into overthinking. So what are you going to do? Keep my eyes on Jesus. Trust that if he called me to this role, he'll give me what I need to handle it. Stop looking at the waves and start trusting the one who called me out of the boat. That's it. That's exactly it. The circumstances didn't disqualify you from trust. They just tested whether your trust was real. At the Wednesday group that evening, I shared about the struggle and the breakthrough. I thought I'd overcome overthinking, but what I'd really done was learn to trust when it was relatively easy. This past month tested whether I could trust when it was hard, when stakes were high, when fear was loud. Tom asked, "So did you overcome the overthinking?" Not completely, but I'm not letting it control me. I acknowledge the fear, I feel the discomfort, but I'm still making decisions and moving forward. That's different from being paralyzed. Marcus, who'd been coming for a month now, said, "That helps me, because I keep expecting to reach a point where I never want to overthink again." But maybe that's not realistic. Maybe it's about learning to act despite wanting to overthink. Exactly. The urge to overthink might always be there, especially under stress. But we can choose trust over analysis. We can choose action over paralysis, even when it's uncomfortable. Chris, the younger man who'd questioned whether overthinking was just being careful, spoke up. "I made a big decision this week. First major decision I've made without endless analysis. And I felt terrified the whole time. But I did it. And it turned out fine. Not perfect, but fine. And I realized the terror doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're doing something that matters." That's wisdom, Pastor James said. We often think trust should feel comfortable. But real trust, the kind that actually stretches us, usually feels uncomfortable. We're acting without certainty. That's inherently uncomfortable. But discomfort doesn't mean we're on the wrong path. Jennifer, who'd brought her sister to the group, added, "My sister made a decision this week about going back to school. She'd been overthinking it for 3 years, but she finally just applied. And watching Ryan struggle this past month actually helped her, because she saw that even someone who's made a lot of progress still has hard moments. It made change feel more achievable." Her words reminded me, my struggle wasn't just personal. People were watching, and seeing me struggle and push through was actually more helpful than if I'd breezed through everything easily. Later that week, the analytics platform migration that I'd been second-guessing hit its first major hurdle, a compatibility issue we hadn't anticipated, and my immediate thought was, "See, I made the wrong choice. I should have analyzed more." But I caught that thought. This wasn't proof I'd chosen wrong. This was a normal complication that comes with any significant change. The question wasn't whether I'd chosen perfectly. It was how I'd handle the challenge. I gathered my team. We've hit a compatibility issue. It's fixable, but it's going to take some creative problem solving. Let's focus on solutions, not on whether we should have predicted this. Every platform would have had some unexpected issues. Let's just solve this one. My team rallied. Within 3 days, we'd developed a workaround, and the platform migration continued successfully. Helen pulled me aside afterward. I heard about the compatibility issue, and I heard how you handled it. That's leadership, Ryan, not predicting every problem, but handling problems effectively when they arise. Well done. That evening, Sarah and I were working on wedding invitations, addressing, stamping, preparing to send, and I noticed something. I wasn't overthinking any of it. Guest list decisions, invitation wording, seating arrangements. We were just deciding and moving forward. You seem better this week, Sarah observed. Less tense than you were 2 weeks ago. I had a moment where the overthinking tried to come back hard, but I pushed through it. Remembered that trust gets tested when stakes are high, and I chose trust over analysis. I'm proud of you. It would have been easy to fall back into old patterns when things got scary. I did fall back a little, but I caught myself. That's what matters. Not that I never struggle, but that I recognize it and choose differently. In my journal that night I wrote, 3 months ago, I heard words that continue transforming me. You think too much, but I already have the answer. This month, I learned something crucial. Growth isn't linear. The overthinking tried to come back when stakes increased. And for a few weeks, I felt like I was losing all my progress. But I wasn't losing it. I was being tested. Could I trust when it was hard, when stakes were high, when fear was screaming at me to analyze more? I learned that trust doesn't get easier when stakes are higher. Trust gets tested when stakes are higher. And I'm learning to pass that test. I still feel afraid sometimes, still catch myself wanting to overanalyze, but I'm not letting that control me. I'm acknowledging the fear and acting anyway. That's trust. God says He already has the answer. I'm learning that's true even when I'm scared, even when stakes are high, even when I don't feel confident. He has the answer. My job is to trust, not to achieve certainty through analysis. 3 months in, and I'd faced my biggest test since starting this journey. The overthinking had tried to reclaim control, but I'd fought it, not perfectly, but successfully. And that proved something important. The change was real, deep enough to withstand testing, strong enough to hold when things got hard. That was growth, real, tested, proven growth. 4 months into learning that I thought too much, I discovered that the best way to solidify what you've learned is to teach it to others. The Wednesday group had grown to 40 regular attendees, and Pastor James asked if I'd be willing to co-lead with him, helping facilitate discussions and mentor newcomers. You've walked the journey, he said. You understand overthinking from the inside. People trust you because you're honest about still struggling sometimes. That's valuable. I accepted, though the thought of co-leading made me nervous. But I was learning that doing things that made me nervous, without overthinking them first, was often exactly what I needed to do. My first night co-leading, I opened by sharing my story, the full arc from paralysis to progress, including the recent setback when the director role triggered my old patterns. I want you to understand something, I told the group. I'm not standing here as someone who has this all figured out. I'm standing here as someone who's 4 months into learning to trust instead of overanalyze. I still struggle, but I've learned some things that are helping, and I want to share them with you. I taught them the distinction between sufficient information and perfect information, between wise planning and anxious overthinking, between trust that acts and fear that paralyzes. The question isn't whether you'll ever feel uncertain, I said. You will, always. The question is whether you'll act despite uncertainty or let uncertainty stop you. After the session, at least 5 people approached me wanting one-on-one conversations. Marcus, who'd been coming for 2 months, said, "You teaching this actually helped me more than just hearing about your journey, because you articulated the principles clearly. Now I can apply them to my own decisions." Over the next few weeks, I met with several people individually. Ben from work, who was overthinking whether to apply for a transfer. A woman named Amy, who'd been overthinking whether to end an unhealthy relationship for 2 years. A young man named Josh, who couldn't decide on a college major. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. They'd explain their situation, all the factors they'd been analyzing. And I'd ask, What would sufficient information look like? What are the key factors? What's actually keeping you from deciding? Almost always the answer was fear. Not lack of information, fear of being wrong, fear of regret, fear of commitment. Fear is normal, I tell them, but fear doesn't mean you need more analysis. It means you need more trust. You already have sufficient information. You're just afraid to act on it. Ben decided to apply for the transfer. Amy ended the unhealthy relationship. Josh picked a major and committed to it, and each of them reported back, "It wasn't as scary as I thought. And even though I don't know if it's the perfect choice, I'm moving forward. That feels better than staying stuck." At work, I was settling into the director role. The platform migration was succeeding. My teams were functioning well. I was making decisions with appropriate analysis. Not excessive, not insufficient, but appropriate. Helen noticed. "You've really grown into this role, Ryan. You're making strategic calls confidently. Not overthinking, but not being reckless either. That's the balance we need." I'm learning that balance. It's not natural for me yet, but I'm getting better at it. Well, keep doing what you're doing. The executive team is impressed. At home, wedding planning was in full swing. We were 2 months away from the wedding date, and remarkably, we were mostly on track without any major stress. Sarah commented on it one evening. "You know what's amazing? We're planning a wedding without you overthinking everything. A year ago, this would have been a nightmare of analysis, but we're just doing it." I think I've finally internalized that most decisions don't need extensive analysis. They just need sufficient thought and commitment. Like the flowers. Remember? We looked at 3 florists. Liked one. Booked them. Done. The old you would have researched every florist in the city. The old me would still be researching and we wouldn't have booked anyone. She laughed. Fair point. One evening, Sarah's dad called. He'd recovered well from the heart attack and was back to most of his normal activities. "Ryan, I wanted to thank you, not just for how you supported Sarah and our family during the crisis, but for how you handled it. You didn't try to fix everything or control everything. You were just present. That's what we needed." His words meant more than he knew. Because being present without trying to control through analysis, that had been one of my biggest challenges during his crisis, and apparently it had been exactly what was needed. At Sunday service, Pastor James preached on Matthew 6:34. "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Notice Jesus isn't saying don't plan for tomorrow, Pastor James explained. He's saying don't let worry about tomorrow steal today's peace. Don't let anxiety about future uncertainty paralyze you today. Handle today's decisions today. Trust God with tomorrow's decisions tomorrow. His words resonated deeply with me. I'd been so focused on trying to predict and control future outcomes that I'd missed being present for today. But I was learning to handle today's decisions with the information available today and trust God with tomorrow. After the service, a couple approached me. "We heard you share your story a month ago about overthinking, and we've been stuck for a year trying to decide whether to adopt. We've analyzed every angle, but after hearing you, we realized we're not waiting for more information. We're waiting for certainty that doesn't exist. We applied last week." Stories like that kept coming. People I'd never met were being affected by my willingness to share my struggle publicly, and each story reminded me, vulnerability multiplies. When you're honest about your struggle and your growth, you give others permission to change too. At the Wednesday group, now with over 50 regular attendees, we'd started breaking into smaller discussion circles. I led one focused specifically on decision-making and overthinking. In my circle were about 15 people, all at different stages of learning to trust instead of overanalyze, and I watched them help each other, share insights, offer encouragement. One woman, Patricia, shared about finally deciding to start her own business after 5 years of analysis. Ryan's testimony kept coming back to me. "You already have sufficient information. You're just afraid." So I stopped researching and started doing. Registered the business last week. A man named Stephen talked about proposing to his girlfriend after 2 years of overthinking. I realized I was waiting to feel completely certain, but that feeling never comes. So I chose trust over certainty. She said yes. Watching them apply what I'd learned and taught, it solidified the principles in my own mind. Teaching forced me to articulate clearly what had been instinctive, and their successes reinforced that these principles actually worked. One evening, Tom, who'd been coming since my second week, pulled me aside. "I need to tell you something. When I first started coming, I'd been overthinking whether to leave my toxic job for 18 months. 18 months of analysis paralysis. But watching your journey, seeing you make decisions without perfect certainty, I finally quit. Started a new job last month, and my life is so much better. You changed my trajectory." His words moved me. "I didn't do anything special, I just learned to trust. But you showed me it was possible. That's what I needed to see." At my next therapy session with Dr. Martinez, we reflected on the 4 months of transformation. "When you started, you were completely paralyzed, unable to make any significant decision. Now you're co-leading a large group, mentoring people individually, succeeding in a director role, planning a wedding without stress. How does that feel?" "Surreal, and also natural. Like this is who I was supposed to be all along, but overthinking was preventing it." "That's insightful. Your overthinking wasn't your true self. It was a coping mechanism that had taken over. You're discovering your actual self underneath it." I still catch myself wanting to overthink sometimes, especially when stakes feel high or I'm stressed. That's normal. Those triggers will probably always exist. But you've built tools to recognize and interrupt the pattern. That's what matters. The following week, Sarah and I had our final major wedding decision, the honeymoon. And I noticed my brain trying to engage overthinking mode, research every possible destination, compare costs, analyze activities, create detailed itineraries. I caught it immediately. "Sarah, let's make this simple. What are 3 places you'd love to go?" She named 3. We looked at basic logistics for each, picked the one that felt most exciting, booked it within an hour. "That was shockingly easy," she said, "because we didn't overthink it. We had sufficient information. We know what kind of vacation we enjoy. We know our budget. We know what's feasible time frame-wise. We didn't need extensive research. We needed to choose and trust it'll be great." One Saturday, Pastor James asked if I'd meet with a man who was struggling with severe analysis paralysis. "He's been stuck for years, can't make any major decisions. I think hearing your story directly might help." The man's name was Robert. He was in his mid-40s, and he'd been unable to make career decisions, relationship decisions, or life decisions for over a decade. "I've researched everything," he told me, "read hundreds of books on decision-making, taken courses, talked to counselors, but I still can't commit to anything. Can I ask you something? What are you afraid of?" He paused. "I'm afraid of wasting my life on the wrong path." "And by trying to avoid wasting your life on the wrong path, what have you been doing instead?" The realization hit him visibly. "I've been wasting my life on no path at all." "Exactly. You've been so afraid of choosing wrong that you've chosen nothing, and choosing nothing is its own kind of wrong choice." We talked for 2 hours. I shared my story, the principles I'd learned, the tools I used, and I watched something shift in his eyes. A glimmer of hope that maybe change was possible. "What's one decision you've been overthinking?" I asked. "Whether to pursue a relationship with a woman I've been dating casually for a year. I keep analyzing whether she's right for me." "Do you enjoy being with her?" "Yes." "Do you respect her?" "Yes." "Do you share compatible values?" "Yes." "Then you have sufficient information to choose to pursue it seriously. You don't need perfect certainty about whether she's the one. You just need enough information to decide it's worth investing in. The rest you figure out together." He came to the Wednesday group the following week, and 2 weeks later, he told the group he'd committed to the relationship and they'd decided to move in together. "I've been overthinking this for a year, but Ryan helped me see. I already knew enough. I was just afraid." Stories like Robert's reminded me why I'd gone through this transformation, not just for my own freedom, but to help others find theirs. 6 weeks before the wedding, Sarah and I had our final premarital counseling session with Pastor James. He asked us to reflect on how our relationship had changed over the past 4 months. Sarah spoke first. Ryan has become the partner I always hoped he would be. Present, decisive, trusting, not trapped in his head analyzing everything. Actually living our relationship instead of just thinking about it. And Ryan, how do you see it? Pastor James asked. I'm learning what it means to be a partner, not trying to have everything figured out before committing, but choosing to trust. Trust Sarah, trust us, trust God, and building our future together. The old me needed certainty before acting. The new me acts and trusts we'll figure it out together. Pastor James smiled. That's the foundation of a healthy marriage. Not having all the answers, but trusting each other and trusting God. You've learned that lesson before you even got married. Many couples take years to learn it. That evening, I updated my journal. 4 months ago, I heard words that transformed my life. You think too much, but I already have the answer. Now, I'm co-leading a group of 50 people learning the same lessons, mentoring individuals one-on-one, succeeding in a director role, planning a wedding without stress, helping others break free from overthinking. My struggle with overthinking, the thing that paralyzed me for years, has become my message. Because I understand it from the inside, I can help others who are stuck in it. I'm learning that God doesn't waste our struggles. He redeems them, uses them to help others. My years of overthinking weren't pointless. They're making me able to guide people out of the same trap. In 6 weeks, I marry Sarah, not because I achieved perfect certainty about our compatibility, but because I chose trust over analysis, chose to build a life together instead of waiting to have everything figured out. That's what life looks like on the other side of overthinking, not having all the answers, but living fully anyway, trusting that God really does have the answer even when I can't see it. 4 months in, and my transformation had rippled far beyond my own life. Dozens of people were learning to trust instead of overanalyze. My struggle had become my message. My weakness had become my strength. And that felt like exactly what God had intended all along. 5 months into learning that I thought too much, I stood at the front of a church watching Sarah walk down the aisle toward me, and I wasn't thinking about anything except this moment. No analyzing whether we'd made the right venue choice. No second-guessing the ceremony timing. No overthinking my vows. Just presence, just joy, just trust. When Sarah reached me, she whispered, "You're not in your head. I can see it in your eyes. You're right here." She was right. For the first time in my adult life, I was fully present for a major moment. Not thinking about it, not analyzing it, just living it. The ceremony was beautiful, simple, meaningful. When it came time for vows, I spoke from my heart, without overthinking every word. Sarah, 5 months ago, I couldn't commit to you because I was waiting for perfect certainty that would never come. But you taught me something crucial. Choosing nothing is worse than choosing imperfectly. Today, I'm not choosing you because I've analyzed every possible outcome. I'm choosing you because I love you, I trust you, and I'm done waiting to have everything figured out before living my life. I choose you, today and every day, with certainty not about the future, but about this choice. She was crying. Half the church was crying, and I felt completely at peace, not because I had the future figured out, but because I'd learned to trust instead of trying to figure everything out. The reception was joyful and relaxed, and I noticed something remarkable. I wasn't overthinking any of it. Food running low at one station. The caterers handled it. DJ playing a song we hadn't approved. It was fine. Timeline running 15 minutes behind. No one cared. The old me would have been stressed about every small deviation from the plan. The new me just enjoyed the celebration. During the reception, Pastor James approached me. "You look happier than I've ever seen you. Not just happy about getting married, but happy in yourself, at peace." I am at peace. I've spent years trapped in my own head, but today I'm just here, present, living instead of analyzing. That's what transformation looks like. not perfect circumstances, but presence in whatever circumstances exist. Derek from the Wednesday group approached with his wife. Man, this is beautiful. And it's not just the wedding, it's watching you be fully present for it. That's what we've all been learning. How to be present instead of overthinking. You're living proof it's possible. Several people from the group were there. Tom, Lisa, Marcus, Rachel, Ben. And each of them commented on the same thing. I was different, lighter, more present, more alive. The honeymoon was exactly what we needed. A week in Costa Rica, and I successfully didn't overthink any of it. No rigid itineraries, no extensive research on activities. Just waking up each day and deciding what felt right. This is amazing, Sarah said one evening as we watched the sunset. We're just being, not planning excessively, not analyzing, just enjoying. I keep catching myself wanting to research the best restaurants or plan the optimal schedule, but then I interrupt it. We're here, we're together. That's sufficient. When we returned from the honeymoon, life settled into a new rhythm. Married life, director responsibilities, co-leading the Wednesday group. And through all of it, I kept practicing the principles I'd learned. At work, a major crisis emerged, a data breach that exposed customer information. My immediate instinct was to spiral. How did this happen? What did we miss? Should I have implemented different security protocols? What if this ruins the company? But I caught the overthinking. This wasn't time for analysis paralysis. This was time for decisive action. I gathered my teams. We have a crisis. Here's what we know. Here's what we need to do immediately. Let's focus on solving the problem, not on analyzing how it happened. We'll do that later. Right now, action. We worked 18-hour days for a week, contained the breach, notified affected customers, implemented new security measures. It was intense and stressful, but I didn't let overthinking slow our response. When it was over, Helen pulled me aside. Ryan, you handled that crisis brilliantly. Decisive action, clear communication. No paralysis by analysis. That's leadership. A year ago, I would have been frozen by something like this, overthinking every angle. But I've learned that perfect analysis doesn't prevent crises. Decisive action manages them. The Wednesday group continued growing. We now had over 60 regular attendees and had started a second group on Tuesday evenings to accommodate everyone. And I was watching transformation ripple through dozens of lives. Tom had left his toxic job and was thriving in a new role. Rachel had completed her career change successfully. Marcus had finally committed to his girlfriend, and they were engaged. Ben had gotten the transfer he wanted. Amy had ended her unhealthy relationship and was dating someone new who treated her well. Each story reminded me, change multiplies. When one person breaks free from overthinking, they give permission for others to do the same. One evening, a woman named Grace shared at the group, I've been coming for 2 months, and I just want to say, watching Ryan's journey from the outside has been powerful, because I see someone who still struggles sometimes, who's honest about it, but who keeps choosing trust over analysis. That's given me hope that I can change too. Her words captured what I'd been learning. Transformation isn't about reaching perfection. It's about choosing trust daily, sometimes easily, sometimes with struggle, but consistently choosing. At Sunday service, Pastor James asked if I'd preach. You have a message that people need to hear, about overthinking, about trust, about living instead of just analyzing life. Would you share it? The thought terrified me, preaching to hundreds of people. But I'd learned that doing things that terrified me, without overthinking them first, was often exactly what I needed to do. I agreed. The following Sunday, I stood on stage and shared my full story. From paralysis to progress, from 6 months unable to decide about a promotion to 3 days deciding about a director role, from 3 years unable to commit to Sarah to proposing after learning to trust. Here's what I want you to understand, I told the congregation. Overthinking feels like wisdom. It feels like you're being careful, responsible, thoughtful. But often, it's just fear disguised as prudence. It's trying to control outcomes through analysis, and that's not possible. God says, you think too much, but I already have the answer. Not think more until you figure it out. Not analyze until you achieve certainty. But I already have the answer. Your job isn't to figure everything out. It's to trust, to act on sufficient information, to believe that God is working even when you can't see the full picture. I talked about the difference between sufficient and perfect information, between wise planning and anxious overthinking, between trust that acts and fear that paralyzes. Some of you have been stuck for months or years, I said, unable to make a decision about a job, a relationship, a major life change. You keep thinking you need more information, but you don't. You have sufficient information. What you need is trust. Trust to act without perfect certainty. Trust that God will work through your choice. Trust that you can handle whatever comes. After the service, at least 30 people approached me. Some wanted to join the Wednesday group. Some wanted individual conversations. Some just wanted to say they related deeply to the struggle. One man, probably in his 60s, said with tears, "I've been overthinking major decisions my entire life, and I've watched opportunities pass me by. My career, relationships, everything. I thought it was too late to change. But hearing you, maybe it's not too late." "It's never too late," I told him. "I changed at 36. You can change at 60. The principles are the same, regardless of age." That week, I received dozens of emails and messages from people who'd heard the sermon. Some from people I'd never met, stories of how they'd been paralyzed by overthinking, and my message had given them courage to act. One email stood out, from a college student named Emma. "I've been overthinking which major to choose for 2 years, changed majors 3 times, still not sure. But after hearing you, I realized I'm not waiting for more information. I'm waiting for certainty that doesn't exist. I picked a major today. Just chose. It feels terrifying and freeing at the same time." In therapy with Dr. Martinez, we reflected on the 5 months of transformation. When you started, you couldn't make any decision. Now you're preaching to hundreds of people about trust and decision-making. You're co-leading groups. You're mentoring individuals. You're handling major crises at work decisively. And you're married. That's remarkable change. I still catch myself wanting to overthink, probably always will. But you've built the awareness and tools to recognize it and choose differently. That's what matters. Growth doesn't mean never being tempted by old patterns. It means knowing what to do when they arise. What do you think has made the biggest difference in my transformation? Honestly, I think it's that you stopped trying to eliminate uncertainty and started learning to trust in the midst of it. You realized that perfect certainty doesn't exist, and you learned to act anyway. That's profound wisdom that most people never learn. At home one evening, Sarah and I were talking about plans for the holidays, and I noticed something. We were making decisions quickly, easily, without stress. Where to spend Thanksgiving? We decided in 5 minutes. What to get our families for gifts? We decided that evening. How to handle conflicting family invitations? We made the call and moved on. "This is so different from how you used to be," Sarah observed. "A year ago, holiday planning would have been weeks of analysis. Now we just decide and trust it'll work out." I've learned that most decisions don't need extensive analysis. They need sufficient thought and commitment. And then you make them work. I love this version of you, present, decisive, trusting, the man I married. At the next Wednesday group, I co-led with Pastor James, and we taught specifically on the topic of sufficient versus perfect information. "How do you know when you have sufficient information?" someone asked. "Great question," I said. "Here's what I've learned. Sufficient information means you understand the key factors, you've considered the major implications, and you've consulted people whose input matters. You won't have every answer, but you'll have enough to make a reasonable decision. Perfect information means having every answer, predicting every outcome, eliminating all risk. That doesn't exist. If you're waiting for that, you're waiting forever. But what if I make the wrong choice? Then you adjust, you learn. You handle the consequences. But I've learned something. Making a reasonable decision and committing to it is almost always better than being paralyzed by fear of making the wrong decision. Even imperfect action beats perfect paralysis. After the meeting, multiple people thanked me for articulating that so clearly. And I realized teaching others was solidifying the principles in my own mind. Every time I explained these concepts, they became more real, more integrated, more automatic. One Saturday, Pastor James and I met to discuss expanding the ministry. Ryan, we now have over 100 people between both groups learning to overcome overthinking. And I've been thinking, this message needs to reach more people. Would you consider writing about your journey, maybe a blog or even a book? The suggestion surprised me. Write about overthinking. Would people want to read that? Absolutely. Overthinking is one of the most common struggles people face. And you've learned to overcome it. You have a message people need. I told him I'd think about it, and I actually did think about it. Not overthinking, but considering. Did I have something valuable to share? Could my story help people I'd never meet? Over the next week I started writing, just journaling my journey. The paralysis, the breakthrough, the tools I'd learned, the struggles and victories. And as I wrote, I realized I did have a message. Not because I was perfect, but because I'd walked this path. I understood overthinking from the inside, and I'd learned to choose trust instead. That night I showed Sarah what I'd written, about 20 pages of my story so far. She read it with tears in her eyes. "This is powerful, Ryan. This could help so many people. You should finish it." "You think so?" "I know so. Your story changed my life. It's changing dozens of lives in the groups. It could change thousands more if you share it." In my journal that evening I wrote, 5 months ago, I heard words that transformed everything. You think too much, but I already have the answer. Today I'm married to Sarah, leading at work, co-leading groups that are transforming dozens of lives, preaching about trust, writing about my journey. My overthinking, the weakness that paralyzed me for years, has become my message. Because I understand the struggle deeply, I can guide others through it. I'm learning that God doesn't waste our struggles. He redeems them, transforms them, uses them to help others. I still catch myself wanting to overthink, but now I know what to do. Interrupt the pattern, act on sufficient information, trust God with outcomes. That's freedom, not the absence of uncertainty, but the presence of trust in the midst of it. 5 months in, and my life was completely transformed. Not because I'd reached perfection, but because I'd learned to trust. And that trust was changing everything, for me and for everyone watching my journey. 6 months after that desperate 2 a.m. prayer, 6 months after I heard, "You think too much, but I already have the answer," I stood in my apartment, looking at the whiteboard where I'd been mapping out the book I was writing about my journey. The same apartment where I'd lain awake countless nights, overthinking every decision, where I'd been paralyzed by analysis for years. But now, everything was different. Sarah was in the kitchen making coffee. We'd been married for a month, and married life was teaching me daily lessons about trust, about making decisions together, about not trying to control outcomes through overthinking. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. 6 months ago today, you invited me to the group. My life is completely different now. Thank you for showing me change was possible. I smiled. He was right. It had been exactly 6 months. Half a year since I'd started this journey from paralysis to trust. At work that morning, Helen called me into her office. "Ryan, I wanted to tell you something. The executive team is extremely impressed with your leadership. The way you've handled the director role, navigated crises, made strategic decisions, it's been exceptional. We're creating a new position, VP of Analytics, and we want to offer it to you. VP, Vice President. That was executive leadership. And my immediate thought was to panic, to analyze, to overthink whether I was ready, but I caught it. This was the pattern, and I knew what to do. Can I have the weekend to consider it? I'll give you an answer Monday. Monday works. Walking back to my desk, I felt calm, not because I had the answer figured out, but because I knew how to get to the answer. Gather sufficient information, consider key factors, decide, trust. That evening, Sarah and I talked about the VP opportunity over dinner. "What do you think?" I asked her. "I think you're capable of it, and I think you know what you need to know to decide. The question is, do you want it?" "I do. It's challenging, but I can grow into it. And I'm not going to overthink whether I'm perfectly ready. No one's ever perfectly ready for a promotion like this. So, you're going to accept?" "Yes, I'm going to accept, not because I've analyzed every possible outcome, but because I want it. I'm capable of it, and I trust that God will give me what I need to handle it." She smiled. "Look at you, making a major career decision in one evening. A year ago, this would have taken months. A year ago, I would have been paralyzed. Now I know what to do: gather sufficient information, decide, trust." On Monday, I accepted the VP position, and I felt at peace. Not because I had perfect certainty about succeeding, but because I'd learned that perfect certainty didn't exist, and I could handle whatever came. That Wednesday at the group, now numbering over 80 regular attendees across 2 sessions, I shared about the VP offer and my decision. "I want you to understand something," I told them. 6 months ago, I couldn't decide about a promotion after 6 months of analysis. This week, I decided about VP in 3 days. That's not because I'm special. It's because I've learned principles that work. Gather sufficient information, act, trust. You can learn these same principles. You can change too. Tom stood up. "I want to thank Ryan publicly. 6 months ago, I'd been overthinking whether to leave my toxic job for 18 months. Watching Ryan's journey gave me courage to finally quit. I started a new job 4 months ago. My life is completely different, and it's because Ryan showed me that change was possible." Rachel added, 5 months ago, I'd been stuck trying to decide about a career change for 5 years. But watching Ryan make decisions without perfect certainty, I finally made the change. I'm happier than I've been in years." Story after story. People whose lives had changed because they'd watched me change. It was humbling and powerful. A new member, a woman named Sophie, raised her hand tentatively. "I just started coming. And I'm where Ryan was 6 months ago. Completely paralyzed by overthinking, unable to make any major decision. Is it really possible to change?" I looked at her with empathy. "Yes, absolutely yes. I know it feels impossible right now. I know overthinking feels like who you are. But it's not. It's a pattern you learned, and patterns can be changed. It won't be easy, it won't be quick, but it's absolutely possible." Where do I start? Start by recognizing the pattern. Every time you catch yourself overthinking, name it. "I'm overthinking. This isn't helping." Then interrupt it. Make a small decision with sufficient information instead of perfect information. Practice that daily. Build the muscle. After the meeting, Sophie approached me. "Can we talk more? I need help with a specific decision I've been overthinking for 2 years." We set up coffee for later that week, and I realized this was my life now, helping people overcome overthinking, using my struggle to guide others through theirs. At Sunday service, Pastor James preached on Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Notice it doesn't say God causes all things, Pastor James explained. It says God works in all things. Your struggles, your failures, your weaknesses, God doesn't waste them. He works in them. He redeems them. He uses them for good, often in ways you never expected. His words resonated deeply. God had taken my years of overthinking, the weakness that had paralyzed me, and was using it to help others. He was working in my struggle, redeeming it, transforming it into something useful. After the service, an elderly man approached me. "I heard you preach a few weeks ago about overthinking. I'm 78 years old, and I've been overthinking decisions my entire life. I thought it was too late to change, but hearing you, maybe it's not too late. It's never too late. The principles work regardless of age. You can start learning to trust today. He started coming to the Wednesday group, and I thought, if a 78-year-old man can start learning to trust instead of overthink, then it's really never too late for anyone. That week, I met with Sophie over coffee. She'd been overthinking whether to end her engagement for 2 years. I have doubts. But I don't know if they're legitimate concerns or just cold feet, so I keep analyzing, trying to figure out if I should marry him or not. Can I ask you something? Are the doubts about specific issues, incompatibilities, values, misalignments, concerning behaviors, or are they vague feelings of uncertainty? Mostly vague uncertainty, wondering if there's someone better suited for me, questioning if I'll regret this, that kind of thing. That's not legitimate concern. That's fear of commitment disguised as analysis. You could analyze that forever and never reach certainty. The question is, do you love him? Do you want to build a life with him? Do you share compatible values and goals? Yes to all of that. Then you have sufficient information. The vague doubts are just your brain trying to achieve impossible certainty before committing. But that certainty doesn't exist, not for anyone. You have to choose trust over analysis. She looked at me with tears. How do I know I'm not making a mistake? You don't, that's the point. You'll never know with perfect certainty, but you know enough. And staying stuck in analysis for 2 years, that's not protecting you from mistakes. That's just preventing you from living. She got married 3 weeks later, and she sent me a message. I'm so grateful you helped me see I was overthinking. The wedding was beautiful. I'm happy. And I realized, even if this were somehow the wrong choice, staying stuck forever would have been worse, but I don't think it's wrong. I think I was just afraid. Stories like Sophie's kept multiplying. People I'd never met were reaching out after hearing the sermon or reading blog posts I'd started sharing. Each story reminded me vulnerability multiplies. When you're honest about your struggle, you give others permission to face theirs. At work, the VP transition began, and immediately I was tested with decisions that had massive company-wide implications. My instinct was to overthink. What if I'm wrong? What if there's a better option? What if I miss something crucial? But I'd learned what to do. Gather key information, consult relevant experts, consider major factors, decide, trust. I made calls about data infrastructure, about team reorganization, about strategic priorities. Not perfectly. Not without some missteps, but decisively. And I learned that decisive leadership, even when imperfect, was better than paralyzed perfection-seeking. Helen observed the change. You know what's remarkable? You're making VP-level decisions with confidence. Not arrogance, confidence. You're not overthinking, but you're not being reckless either. That's the balance we need. I'm still learning that balance. But I've learned that waiting for perfect certainty doesn't create better outcomes. It just delays outcomes. One evening, I finished the first draft of the book I'd been writing, 40,000 words about my journey from overthinking to trust, about the principles I'd learned, about how others could change too. I showed it to Sarah. She read the entire manuscript in one sitting. This is powerful, Ryan. This needs to be published. Thousands of people are stuck in overthinking, and this could help them. You really think so? I know so. Your story is helping people one by one. This could help people by the thousands. Over the next few weeks, with Pastor James's guidance, I started the process of finding a publisher, and I learned another lesson about trust. You don't need to have everything figured out before starting. You start with what you know and figure out the rest as you go. At the 6-month anniversary meeting of the Wednesday group, we had over 100 people attending across 3 sessions. And Pastor James asked me to share my complete journey, where I'd started, where I was now, what I'd learned. I stood in front of the group and told my full story. From the 6 months of paralysis over a promotion, to the 3 years unable to commit to Sarah, to hearing you think too much, but I already have the answer, to the 6 months of transformation that had followed. Here's what I want you to understand, I said. 6 months ago, I was where some of you are now. completely paralyzed by overthinking, unable to make any significant decision, convinced that if I just analyzed more, I'd eventually achieve certainty. But that's not how it works. Overthinking doesn't create certainty, it creates paralysis. Real certainty comes from trust, from gathering sufficient information and then acting, trusting that God will work through your choice. I'm not standing here as someone who has this perfectly figured out. I still catch myself wanting to overthink, especially when stakes are high or I'm stressed, but I've learned what to do. Recognize the pattern, interrupt it, act on sufficient information, trust God with outcomes. And that's transformed everything. I accepted 2 promotions. I got married. I'm helping dozens of people overcome overthinking. I'm writing a book. Not because I achieved perfect certainty about any of it, but because I learned to trust. After I finished, people shared their own transformations. Tom, Rachel, Marcus, Ben, Amy, Sophie. Story after story of lives changed by learning to trust instead of overanalyze. And then new people shared. People I'd never met who'd come because they'd heard about the group. People in the early stages of learning these principles. People where I'd been 6 months ago. One woman said, "Hearing all these stories, it gives me hope, because I've been stuck for years. But if all of you can change, maybe I can too." You can, I told her. Absolutely you can. The principles work. Trust works. You just have to practice it. That Sunday, Pastor James asked me to give the closing benediction. I stood before the congregation and said, "If you're stuck in overthinking right now, I want you to hear these words that change my life. You think too much, but God already has the answer. You don't have to figure everything out. You don't have to achieve perfect certainty before acting. You just have to gather sufficient information, make the choice, and trust. Trust God. Trust the process. Trust that you can handle whatever comes. That's freedom. Not having all the answers, but trusting the one who does." After the service, dozens of people approached me. Some wanted to join the groups. Some wanted individual conversations. Some just wanted to say those words had spoken to exactly what they needed to hear. One young woman said, "I've been overthinking whether to break up with my boyfriend for a year. But hearing you, I realized I'm not waiting for more information. I'm waiting for impossible certainty. I know what I need to do. I just need courage to do it." That week, I met with my editor about the book. "This is powerful," she said. "Real, honest, practical. People need this message. We want to publish it." The book would come out in 6 months, and I realized my journey from overthinking to trust would reach people I'd never meet. My struggle would help people around the world. At my final session with Dr. Martinez, we were transitioning to as needed rather than weekly. She reflected on the 6 months of transformation. "When you started, you were completely paralyzed. Now you're a VP, you're married, you're leading groups, you're writing a book, you're helping dozens of people change. That's not just personal transformation, that's purpose discovered through struggle." I still have moments where overthinking tries to come back. Of course. Those patterns were built over years. They'll try to resurface, especially under stress, but you've built tools to recognize and interrupt them. That's what matters. What do you think made the biggest difference? Honestly, you stopped trying to control outcomes through analysis and started trusting. That's profound wisdom that most people never learn. And now you're teaching it to others. That's the full circle. Your weakness transformed into your ministry. That evening, Sarah and I sat on our couch reflecting on the 6 months. "Can you believe how different life is?" she asked. "Sometimes I can't. 6 months ago, I couldn't decide about anything. Now I'm making VP-level decisions, leading groups, writing a book. It feels surreal. You know what I'm most grateful for? That you're present, not trapped in your head, actually here with me, living our life instead of analyzing it. I'm grateful for that too. And I'm grateful you waited for me. You could have left when I was stuck, but you gave me grace to change. I saw who you could be underneath the overthinking. I'm glad you're finally becoming that person." In my journal that night, I wrote one final entry. 6 months ago, I heard words that transformed my life. "You think too much, but but I already have the answer. Today, I'm a VP. I'm married to Sarah. I'm leading groups helping hundreds of people overcome overthinking. I'm publishing a book. My life is completely different from where it started. But more than the external changes, I'm different internally. I'm not trapped in my head anymore. I'm present. I'm living. I'm trusting. I still catch myself wanting to overthink sometimes. Those patterns were built over years. They don't disappear completely, but now I know what to do. Recognize the pattern, interrupt it, act on sufficient information, trust God with outcomes. To anyone reading this who's stuck in overthinking, you can change. It won't be easy, it won't be quick, but it's absolutely possible. You don't need perfect certainty to act. You need sufficient information and trust. That's all. God says He already has the answer. Your job isn't to figure everything out. It's to trust, to gather sufficient information, to act, to believe that He's working even when you can't see the full picture. That's freedom. Not the absence of uncertainty, but the presence of trust in the midst of it. Not having all the answers, but knowing the one who does. 6 months ago, I was paralyzed. Today, I'm free. Not because life became certain, but because I learned to trust in the midst of uncertainty. And if I can change, you can too. The principles work. Trust works. You just have to practice it. Start today. Make one decision with sufficient information instead of waiting for perfect information. Then make another and another. Build the muscle. You think too much. But God already has the answer. Trust Him. Act. And watch your life transform. 6 months after that desperate 2 a.m. prayer, my life was unrecognizable. Not because I'd achieved perfection or certainty, but because I'd learned to trust. And that trust had changed everything, for me and for everyone watching my journey. If you've walked with me through this story, I have one question for you. What decision are you overthinking right now? What are you waiting for perfect certainty about? You already have sufficient information. You're just afraid to act on it. Stop waiting. Start trusting. Make the decision. And watch what God does with your obedience. You think too much, but God already has the answer. Trust Him. And discover the freedom that comes from acting in faith instead of analyzing in fear. Your transformation starts today, just like mine did 6 months ago, and like mine, it will change everything.